we've seen the concept of risk appetite, but I want you to properly understand exactly what it is, how it works, and if you can see it correctly, I've put a little plate and a risk. So it's how much risk you want to eat in very fictionalized terms. But rather it's the level of a risk an organization is willing to accept. Now this is a very broad definition. More granular would be to say it's the willingness to accept risk in an area of the organization or a certain category of risk. So this might still be vague, and we're going to dig deep enough till you really understand what this looks like. I'm going to show you an example, a real life example that I found on the web. Let's understand the risk appetite and the concept of acceptable risk. An acceptable risk is sort of a level of risk that an organization decides can be tolerated. No additional controls are warranted. Now, we have on our other side our risk appetite. It's the level of risk that an organization is willing to accept. If we have an acceptable risk, we have a level determined by the risk appetite that says it is an acceptable risk. Some organizations might have, say, 0 paper policies, and a very tolerant organization with a 0 paper policy might say, okay, it's acceptable if you print things for, your board. But another organization might say, no, we made a commitment to 0 paper, and so it is absolutely not acceptable. Our risk appetite is exactly how tolerant we are in that, and how much risk we'd like to have around this example of, a 0 paper policy. Let's try to understand some benefits of defining a risk appetite. And here I'm still conscious that it's still a bit vague in your mind, so we're going to see an example. So the risk appetite is the level of risk that an organization is willing to accept. It clarifies the risk types and the amounts in often quantitative terms, or for actions that don't have a price tag. It might be different frameworks of acceptable or unacceptable behavior. It clarifies the type and amount of risk that an organization is willing to accept. It clarifies the mission and vision. By having a risk appetite, you're really saying, we accept this, but we don't accept this. We accept this, but we don't accept this. It more clearly forms the mission and vision of the organization. It clarifies risk-taking. It articulates risk-taking, risk mitigation, risk avoidance, including at an aggregate level. I remember speaking when I was working in a bank on a trip to Spain. So I was checking out one of the branches there, and that particular employee in the risk management department, he used to work for another Spanish bank. And he told me his previous project, which had taken over 1 year in a previous company, was to determine the risk appetite. And he spent 1 year talking to people at the board level, talking to people at management, talking to the risk management functions. And we're talking about a large bank, so it was determined at a very large level. 1 year determining for the many different components of the bank the risk appetite. Risk communication. If you, as the board, want to talk to your shareholders, or even the public at large, or even the regulator, and you are trying to say, this is something we are willing to do, or this is something we are not willing to do, then it helps by defining a risk appetite to know what you can actually say in those cases. It's a bit like a politician, part of a political party. He has to determine, what's okay with his political party. So if he gets it wrong, well, he can get a backlash from his own political party. And so it's the same thing in an organization. If it's very clear what you're allowed to do, and there are relatively few gray areas, then you can easily communicate, to externally, to the press, to anyone in the organization or outside who needs to know about what is possible or what is not, exactly, what our risk appetite for these risks are. Risk awareness. It brings an awareness of what is acceptable in an organization or not. So, a little example is there might be a cupboard in your office that has office supplies. It might be acceptable behavior for you to, just take, 20 pens and bring them back home. But if there have been notices that, this is a very low risk example, but if there have been notices that this is an unacceptable practice, then the risk awareness about this particular issue has been brought to the attention of everyone, using pens and other supplies in that cupboard. Very small example, but I just wanted to show you things at different levels. And the risk culture, it helps positively impact a defined risk culture, understanding of what is, absolutely what you should do or absolutely what you should not do in an organization, and supports planning, supports the board and senior management in formulating a plan and executing a strategy.